Standing before the full-length mirror in the barracks room, I adjusted the single gold chevron on the collar of my Army combat uniform. 8 long years of relentless drills under a scorching sun had faded the shoulders of the uniform to a pale tan. The military's mark on my body was a long, jagged scar on my left forearm, a memento from a nighttime obstacle course training accident last year. On the simple wooden desk lay the official orders for my honorable discharge, stamped with the bold, red seal of the base command. Holding the papers, I mentally calculated the severance pay I would receive after 8 years of service. The total sum was just enough to cover the initial deposit for my mother's upcoming inpatient treatment. Her congestive heart failure had taken a severe turn 3 months ago. With funds depleted, we had no choice but to bring her home, to wait while we scrambled to find the money. Her care required round-the-clock attention, and the cost of medication was staggering. With no other relatives to turn to, I had to request an early discharge to go home and shoulder the burden. I gathered my personal belongings, carefully folding my undershirts, a worn face towel, and a few training manuals, stuffing them into my familiar Molly rucksack. All standard-issue gear, my sleeping bag, mosquito net, and field jacket had been turned in to the quartermaster's supply yesterday afternoon. I tucked my discharge papers into the outermost zippered pocket. Hoisting the rucksack onto my shoulder, I was ready to head to the main gate and catch the afternoon bus home. As I stepped into the hallway, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the stairwell. Private Miller, a soldier from the base security platoon, rushed towards me, leaning against the doorframe to catch his breath. He swallowed hard and hastily announced that the division commander, Colonel Evans, had just called the front desk. I was to report to his office number 1, immediately. The summons was a complete surprise. With all my out-processing complete, the order to see the CO stopped me in my tracks. I set my rucksack down, asked Miller to keep an eye on it for me, and straightened my uniform. Then, I walked briskly toward the 3-story command headquarters building across the quad. Along the concrete path, squads of young soldiers were drilling under the harsh afternoon sun. A few recognized me and raised a hand in a casual salute. I nodded back and kept moving. 8 years I had given to this unit, transforming from a bewildered recruit into a seasoned, experienced Army Ranger. Every corner of this base was intimately familiar. The Soldier of the Year plaques and the commendations hanging in the unit's heritage room were about to become part of my past. The responsibility of being the eldest son in a poor family didn't allow me to continue my military career. Reaching the 2nd floor of the command building, I stopped in front of office number 1 and knocked 3 sharp, distinct times. A deep, warm voice from within granted me entry. I pushed the door open, stepped inside, snapped to attention with a click of my heels, and rendered a sharp salute, reporting to the colonel as regulations required. Colonel Evans looked up from a stack of paperwork, gestured to the leather-upholstered wooden chair opposite his desk, and told me to sit. As I sat, I maintained a perfectly straight posture, my hands placed neatly on my knees. The colonel removed his reading glasses, setting them on the desk. His eyes, fixed on me, were filled with a sense of regret. He began to speak about my 8 years of service, recalling live-fire exercises and times I had led my reconnaissance team deep behind simulated enemy lines, always completing the mission with excellence. He frankly expressed that it was a great loss for the unit to sign off on the discharge of an outstanding soldier like me. However, he also understood the dire financial straits my family was in. He knew about my mother's heart condition and that her treatment could not be delayed. He opened his desk drawer, took out a thick envelope, placed it on the desk, and pushed it toward me. It was a personal contribution from him and a few other senior officers in the division, a gesture to help with my mother's medical expenses. I stood and respectfully declined the money. I explained that I was healthy and could work to earn the money for my mother's care myself. I didn't want to be a burden on the modest salaries of my superiors. Seeing my firm refusal, the colonel sighed and put the envelope back in the drawer. The atmosphere in the room suddenly grew heavy. He stood up, walked over to a steel filing cabinet against the wall, unlocked it, and pulled out a tangent-colored file folder. Returning to his desk, he placed the folder down, his tone shifting to the serious, commanding voice he used when issuing combat orders. The colonel declared, "Before you officially walk out of that gate, Sergeant, you have one final, top-secret mission to accept, assigned by me personally. This mission had nothing to do with guns or training ranges. It was to go on a blind date with a woman, arranged by him. The bizarre request caught me completely off guard. The colonel had always been a man who kept his professional and private life strictly separate. He never interfered in the personal affairs of his subordinates. I started to question the nature of this order. He signaled for me to remain silent and opened the tan folder himself. He explained this was no ordinary setup for a romance. It concerned the life, honor, and safety of a person being squeezed by a hidden power. This mission required a true soldier with nerves of steel, someone unafraid of confrontation, someone whose will couldn't be bent by money or power. He emphasized that the enemy in this mission didn't carry a rifle on the battlefield. Instead, they used administrative connections and covert influence to crush their opponents. He needed a solid shield to protect this young woman from their despicable schemes. Looking me straight in the eye, the colonel stated that in the entire division, only I possessed the necessary grit and integrity to be that shield. After hearing his explanation, I understood the complexity of the situation. I was about to face a new kind of war, one without gunfire but filled with danger, right in the heart of civilian life. Inside the folder was a short biography and several close-up photos. The colonel pushed the first photo toward me. The woman in the picture was a female officer in a winter service uniform. She had a delicate face that exuded a stern demeanor, her eyes sharp and resolute. Her name was Catherine Reed, 30 years old, holding the rank of captain, and serving as a section chief in a vital agency. The colonel explained that Kate was the daughter of an old comrade in arms, a man with whom he had faced life-and-death situations years ago. She was professionally brilliant, disciplined, and principled. However, her career and personal life were at a standstill because of a man named Preston Vance. He pulled out a second photo. It showed a young man in a designer suit, his hair slicked back. Preston was a staff officer at the Pentagon, the only son of a very powerful 4-star general. Hiding behind his father's influence, Preston manipulated everything around him to his will. The colonel provided more details about Preston's tactics. He had pursued Kate, but she had flatly rejected him due to their incompatible values. Instead of backing off, Preston used his covert power to completely isolate her. He didn't resort to insults or violence. He would get male colleagues who showed interest in Kate reassigned, transferred, or put under review. He even interfered with partner agencies, creating difficulties in her work, all to force her to turn to him for help. Preston had woven an invisible net, cutting off every potential connection around her, with the sole aim of forcing her to bow down and become his wife. The colonel described Preston as a dangerous, petty man who specialized in using administrative paperwork and backdoor connections to destroy others. He wanted me to appear as Kate's boyfriend, to use the mettle of a ranger to break his siege and help her escape the persistent clutches of this arrogant heir of power. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the desk. I laid out the reality of my current situation. I was just a discharged soldier with no college degree, about to head home to find manual labor to pay for my mother's medicine. The old shingled roof of our house had been leaking for years, and we had no money to fix it. My family was still paying off a bank loan. The social chasm between a dirt-poor, unemployed man and a captain in a command position was immense. I insisted I couldn't play this part. It would damage Captain Reed's reputation. Besides, I had no tools to fight against the power of Preston and his father. The colonel slammed his hand on the desk, his voice booming with authority. He roared, "A warrior never retreats from a stack of administrative papers or from cowards hiding behind their family's influence." He declared it was a final military order. I was to be at the designated location at 1,600 hours 4 p.m. sharp to meet Kate. Seeing his unyielding determination, I knew I couldn't refuse. I stood, clicked my heels, accepted the order, and turned to leave the room. At Ba Mui p.m., I arrived at a coffee shop on the corner of Lee Thung Kiert Street. I was wearing a faded white button-down shirt, worn-out khaki pants, and a pair of standard-issue canvas combat boots. I chose table number 5 in a secluded corner, ordered an iced tea, and sat silently, observing my surroundings. 15 minutes later, a woman walked in. Recognizing Kate from the photo in the file, I stood and raised my hand. She approached with the brisk, decisive stride of a soldier. Kate wore a light blue silk blouse and black trousers. She wore no elaborate makeup. She pulled out the chair opposite me, sat down, and looked me directly in the eye, getting straight to the point without any preliminary pleasantries. Kate stated clearly that she knew the colonel had asked me to pose as her boyfriend to get Preston off her back. She appreciated my help, but also warned me that Preston was a devious man. His actions could negatively impact my civilian life after my discharge. Before I could reply, the coffee shop door opened again. A luxury black sedan had just pulled up to the curb. Preston entered, dressed in an expensive suit, holding the latest smartphone. He scanned the room and then walked directly to our table. Without asking, Preston nonchalantly pulled up an empty chair and sat down next to Kate. He ordered a black iced coffee, his demeanor radiating supreme confidence and arrogance. Preston turned to look at me, his eyes sweeping from my head to my toes, critically assessing my simple attire. He spoke in a measured, polite tone, but every word was laced with venom. He recited my full name, service number, and my former unit. Preston smiled and mentioned that my application for my one-time severance pay was currently sitting on his desk in the policy department where he worked. He leisurely stirred his coffee, implying that the approval process could take a few weeks, a few months, or even be sent back to my local VA for further verification if any irregularities were found. His words were a blatant threat, aimed directly at the money that was a lifeline for my mother. Kate started to protest, but I raised a hand to stop her. I lifted my iced tea and took a long sip. Then, I slammed the glass down on the tabletop, creating a loud bang. I looked Preston straight in the eye, my voice calm and unwavering. I told him that while my paperwork might be on his desk, my life, my honor, and the power to decide my own future belonged to me and me alone. I challenged him to use all the power he had to interfere with my file. I would wait and see what he could accomplish beyond hiding behind a piece of paper with a red stamp. Preston shifted in his seat, adjusting the cufflink on his suit sleeve. He turned to Kate, offering her some condescending advice. He told her she shouldn't waste her time sitting with someone from the bottom of society, a man wearing worn-out canvas shoes and a ragged shirt. He asserted that discharged soldiers like me could only hope to find work as security guards or manual laborers, completely beneath her station as a section chief. Kate immediately slammed her own glass of water on the table, cutting him off. With a cold fury, she pointed her finger directly at his face and began to expose every manipulative trick he had pulled behind her back for the past year. She listed specific incidents with chilling clarity. She brought up how Preston had used his connections to block her transfer request to the Joint Staff back in April. She recounted the story of Captain Miller from the Operations Division, who, merely for offering to help her fix her car, was pressured by Preston into accepting a transfer to a remote border post. Even the logistics department's delay in issuing new computer equipment to her unit was the result of a single phone call from Preston. Kate declared her utter disgust for his hypocrisy. He always played the part of a charming, generous gentleman in public, but in reality, he used his father's rank to strangle all her professional and personal relationships. When Kate finished, I pulled my chair closer to the table and looked her in the eyes. I decided to lay bare the complete and honest truth about my family's situation so she would understand everything. I told her my family home was a dilapidated 3-room cottage with a leaky roof. The $20,000 bank loan we took out when my father was dying of cancer still wasn't paid off. My mother was bedridden with acute heart failure, costing thousands of dollars a month in medicine and hospital bills. I advised Kate to reconsider, to find someone of her own social standing so she wouldn't be dragged down by my problems. I was starting with absolutely nothing. I had no power or resources to shield her from the might of Preston and his father. After I finished, Kate showed no sign of disappointment. She had watched closely how I had faced Preston's threats to my benefits just moments before. Turning to Preston, she declared, her voice ringing with conviction, that she needed a man with a backbone who would stand firm in the face of a storm, not a coward who hid behind his parents' power. She pointed at me and confirmed, right in front of Preston, that she had chosen me to be her husband. Kate sealed it with a final, unshakable sentence. I've already given myself to him. Preston's face darkened. He shot up from his chair, kicked the side of the table hard, creating a loud crash, then turned on his heel and stormed out the door. He jumped into his black sedan and sped away. The next morning, I was at the city's central bus station, buying a ticket for the earliest bus home. The old 2-9 seat coach, with its provincial license plate, was already packed with people and goods. I squeezed past sacks of rice and crates of chickens cluttering the aisle to find an empty spot on the back bench. The bus jolted and bounced continuously on a stretch of highway under repair. The air inside was suffocating, a mix of diesel fumes and the sweat of dozens of passengers. Huddled in the corner, I clutched my rucksack tightly on my lap. Kate's defiant declaration at the coffee shop replayed endlessly in my mind. The resolve of a female officer had completely overwhelmed the vile schemes of the general's son. After 5 grueling hours on the bus, I got off at the county's 3-way intersection. From there, I walked another 2 miles down a red dirt road to get home. The single-story house, built by my grandfather, came into view, its moss-covered tile roof dotted with broken pieces. A blue tarpaulin was stretched crudely over the top to keep the rain from leaking into the kitchen. As I stepped over the cracked cement threshold, the strong smell of herbal medicine hit me. From the dark corner of the bedroom, I could hear my mother's ragged coughing, a relentless hacking sound. She lay under a thin wool blanket, her face gaunt, her eyes sunken from long, sleepless nights tormented by chest pain. Seeing me, my mother tried to push herself up, but lacked the strength and fell back onto the bed. I put down my rucksack, drew a basin of water from the well to wash my face, and then sat at the wooden table in the middle of the room. I took the envelope with my severance pay out of my rucksack and began to divide the money. The total amount was just over $15,000. I set aside $7,000, wrapping it carefully in a plastic bag, to pay the hospital deposit for my mother's upcoming treatment. Another $2,000 was separated to make this month's bank loan payment. That left only about $6,000. I planned to use it for daily groceries and medicine to help my mother regain her strength over the next few months. Looking at the dwindling stacks of bills on the table, I felt the full weight of the financial pressure on my shoulders. The severance pay would run out quickly. I had to find a stable job immediately to keep my family afloat. 3 days later, after settling things at home, I took a bus back to the city to look for work. With a folder of photocopied resumes, I applied to a private security firm and was assigned to a high-end office building downtown. My shift was from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The nightly duties included checking the glass door systems, logging the license plates of motorcycles parked overnight in the basement garage, and patrolling the stairwells from the 1st to the 15th floor. The starting salary was $3,000 a month, with a small bonus for night meals if I performed well and there were no incidents of theft. I received a blue uniform, pinned a name tag to my chest, and began my work with the serious, disciplined demeanor of a soldier. On my 10th day, the building's management supervisor, a man named Mr. Thompson, unexpectedly called me to his office at 3 p.m. He pushed a monthly performance review across the desk and told me to read it carefully. The paper listed 2 violations: unfriendly customer interaction and failure to lock the rear service gate at 2 a.m. Mr. Thompson tapped his finger on the desk, announcing that the company would be deducting $500 from my monthly salary and transferring me to a dusty construction site on the outskirts of the city. I checked the duty logbook again, confirming that the service gate had been secured with 2 padlocks that night, and the log was countersigned by the shift supervisor. The customer complaint was also completely baseless, as almost no one entered or exited the building during the night shift. Seeing the supervisor's evasive and fidgety demeanor, I immediately knew what was happening. I leaned forward, planting my hands on his desk, and asked him directly, "Did a man named Preston Vance from the Pentagon just call you and apply some pressure?" Mr. Thompson flinched, nervously picking up the paper and stammering, "This is a standard company policy. It has nothing to do with any individual." I didn't need to hear any more of his pathetic excuses. I unpinned the name tag from my chest, unclipped the professional walkie-talkie from my belt, and slammed them both on the desk. I declared that I would rather haul boxes for a living, earning every clean dollar, than work for cowards who were willing to kneel and be the lackeys of a corrupt power. I turned and walked out of the office, went straight to the garage, got on my motorcycle, and left the building. Today was the 5th anniversary of my father's death. I was up at dawn, cleaning the house and borrowing a few sets of plastic tables and chairs from the neighbors to set up in our mossy brick courtyard. At 7 a.m., my aunts and uncles began to arrive, carrying baskets of fruit and ceremonial paper offerings. My Uncle Frank, my father's younger brother, sat with his legs crossed at the porch table, taking long, loud drags from a pipe. He exhaled a cloud of white smoke and began to loudly discuss my employment situation. He pointed at me, where I was busy plucking a chicken by the well, his voice dripping with disdain. Wasted 8 years of his youth in the army just to come home and freeload off his old mother. My Aunt Carol, sitting next to him, chimed in, mocking me for getting fired from my security job in the city after less than 2 weeks. She advised me to borrow more money and go work as a construction laborer overseas to pay off my debts. I remained silent, continuing to chop the chicken into neat pieces with a cleaver. At exactly 10 a.m., the roar of a car engine echoed from the end of the lane. A black, high-clearance Ford Everest SUV slowly reversed down the narrow dirt path and parked right in front of my gate. The door opened and Kate stepped out. She wore a crisp white silk blouse, perfectly tailored black trousers, and block-heeled shoes. She carried a large basket of imported fruit and a lavish, velvet-boxed gift of nutritional supplements. The entire chattering clan of relatives fell silent. Uncle Frank lowered his pipe. Aunt Carol's eyes went wide, staring at the strange woman who was now walking into the yard, radiating an aura of dignified authority. Kate walked through the gate, nodding a polite greeting to the older relatives sitting on the porch. She asked for each person's name, addressing them respectfully as uncle, aunt, and sir, her etiquette flawless. Placing the gift basket on a small wooden table, Kate entered the main room of the house and lit 3 sticks of incense at my father's altar. Afterwards, she walked over to the edge of the bed where my mother was resting. Taking my mother's frail hand, Kate gently introduced herself as my girlfriend. She explained that since it was the anniversary of my father's passing, she had arranged her work schedule to come and pay her respects and check on my mother's health. Her clear, articulate manner and the absolute respect she showed my family completely changed the atmosphere. The relatives who had been loudly criticizing me just moments before now sat in stunned silence, not daring to utter another word of dissent. At 12 p.m. sharp, everyone began setting up for the memorial lunch. Suddenly, 3 large motorcycles roared through the gate, braking hard and leaving black skid marks on the brick courtyard. 5 men, their arms covered in tattoos and wearing tight-fitting t-shirts, jumped off the bikes. The leader flicked a half-smoked cigarette to the ground and crushed it with the toe of his boot. He pulled a crumpled IOU from his pocket and bellowed the name of Hung, Uncle Frank's son. A $2,000 loan taken out 3 months ago had ballooned with interest to nearly $4,000. Hung had skipped town. The loan sharks had decided to come to the family gathering to collect the debt. The leader announced that if the family didn't produce the money today, they would smash everything in sight and tear the roof off the house. Uncle Frank's face went pale. He quickly backed away behind his relatives, vehemently denying he knew where his son was hiding. The debt collectors ignored his pleas. Seeing their aggressive stance, a few of the younger men in the family jumped to their feet. My cousin Tom grabbed a plastic chair, ready to defend the memorial feast. 2 of the thugs stepped forward, pulling collapsible steel batons from their jackets and slamming them on the ground as a warning. They pointed their weapons at Tom, forcing the young men back against the wall. At the same time, another thug kicked over the nearest plastic table. The carefully prepared memorial meal crashed to the ground. Dishes shattered, and food splattered everywhere. Women screamed in panic. My mother, hearing the commotion, struggled to her feet and staggered to the window to look out. The lead thug strode towards the porch, raising his hand to knock over the table with Kate's gift basket. Moving swiftly from the well, I shot out my left hand and clamped down on the tattooed man's wrist just as his fingers touched the basket. I squeezed hard and twisted his wrist clockwise. The leader screamed in pain, forced to bend over to avoid dislocation. Before he could react, I kicked the back of his knee, forcing him to his knees on the brick. Seeing their boss taken down, the 4 other thugs charged at me with their weapons. I shoved the leader forward as a shield and backstepped to dodge the first baton strike. I grabbed the arm of the closest attacker, used his momentum to get in close, and threw him over my shoulder, sending him sprawling on his back. The remaining 3 hesitated for a second, stunned by my Special Forces combat skills. One swung his baton in a downward arc. I leaned away from the blow and threw a straight right punch, hitting him squarely in the solar plexus. He crumpled to the ground, clutching his stomach and gasping for air. The last 2 tried to run for the gate. I lunged forward, using a leg sweep to take down the first one. The last man, terrified, dropped his baton and threw his hands in the air, surrendering. The entire confrontation, from start to finish, took less than 2 minutes. I found some nylon rope used to tie down the roof tarp, yanked each man's arms behind his back, and bound them tightly. After securing the last one, I turned to Uncle Frank and told him to call the sheriff's department. Kate had been standing with her arms crossed, leaning against the wooden doorframe, watching the entire thing. She gave a firm nod, then went inside, poured a glass of water, and brought it out to me. The deputies arrived 15 minutes later, took statements, and hauled the 5 thugs away. The courtyard was a mess of broken dishes and scattered food. The relatives began to clean up the debris, their whispers about the fight still buzzing. Kate emerged from the house, took off her metal watch and put it in her purse, then rolled up the sleeves of her silk blouse and walked straight to the outdoor kitchen area. She began to clean up the vegetables that were being washed. Seeing her about to plunge her hands into a tub of dirty dishes, Aunt Carol rushed over to stop her, insisting that a city person shouldn't be doing such messy chores. Kate gently moved her aunt's hand aside, stating that she was now part of the family, and helping in the kitchen on a day like this was nothing to fuss about. Sitting down on a low plastic stool, she picked up a basket of water spinach and began expertly trimming it. After the vegetables, she moved on to a bucket of crabs that Uncle Frank had brought over to replace the ruined meal. Kate poured the crabs into a stone mortar and began to grind them with a pestle, her rhythm steady and even, not spilling a drop. She cleaned the shells, carefully scooping out the rich tamale into a small bowl. She then added fresh well water to the mortar, strained the liquid through a fine sieve to create a broth, and set it aside. After the prep work, Kate gathered some dried straw, lit it, and fed split logs into the wood-fired stove. The flames roared to life, smoke billowing through the small space. She stirred the crab broth, carefully controlling the heat so the crab meat would coagulate into large, fluffy curds on the surface. After seasoning the soup, she fried some garlic in lard, added the crab tamale for color and flavor, and poured it into the simmering pot. Next, she placed a wok on the fire, added oil, and stir-fried crushed garlic until fragrant. She tossed in the vibrant green water spinach, stir-frying it quickly over the high heat. The aroma of garlic and greens filled the courtyard. 20 minutes later, 2 new platters of food were set out on a mat in the middle of the house. The memorial meal now consisted of the remaining boiled chicken, a bowl of fresh crab soup, and a plate of garlic stir-fried water spinach. Kate filled the first bowl with rice, carried it with both hands over to my mother's bed, helped her sit up, and carefully fed her spoonfuls of soup. My mother ate with appetite, nodding continuously and praising the authentic, rustic flavor of the soup. She took Kate's hand and urged her to go join the family at the table before the food got cold. Sitting at the men's table, I held my bowl of white rice and watched Kate's back as she diligently cared for my mother. A female military officer who dealt with mountains of official documents daily was now kindling a fire and cooking in our dilapidated, tarp-roofed kitchen. There was no social distance, no distinction between rich and poor. The relatives sitting around us no longer uttered a single word of criticism or mockery as they had that morning. Everyone ate in silence, occasionally stealing respectful glances at Kate. I shoveled rice into my mouth, feeling a bond forming through these simple, practical actions. Her presence had not only quelled a group of thugs, but it also brought a real sense of stability to this house. After the simple meal ended, I took all the dishes to the well and washed them myself, already forming a plan in my mind to build a solid foundation, a home worthy of this woman. At 7 p.m., the relatives had all left, and quiet returned to the house. My mother had taken her medicine and fallen into a deep sleep. With a flashlight to guide us, I invited Kate for a walk along the dike that encircled our village. We walked side by side on the gravel path, a cool breeze blowing in from the river, chasing away the heat of the day. Under the faint light of the moon, Kate began to talk about the pressures of her job at headquarters. She explained that dealing with people like Preston wasn't as straightforward as taking down the thugs that afternoon. The enemies in her workplace never confronted you directly. They used approval processes, administrative hurdles, and official stamps to bring your work to a grinding halt. Kate detailed Preston's tactics over the past month. He had used his connections in the finance department to freeze her unit's operational budget. Every request for office supplies, from printer paper to toner cartridges, was stalled with the excuse of pending review. The staff under Kate's command were becoming demoralized. Many had requested transfers to other departments to avoid the collateral damage. Preston's goal was to cut off all her resources, forcing her to call him for help. She stated firmly that she would rather pay for the supplies out of her own pocket than ever stoop to ask him for anything. Her words, though resolute, revealed the exhaustion of someone fighting a constant battle against underhanded schemes. Hearing her story, I stopped walking, turned to face her, and reached for her right hand. The hand of a female officer was slightly rough from regular firearms training, but it felt incredibly strong and steady. Looking directly into her eyes, I spoke each word clearly. I told her I didn't have the power to interfere with her paperwork or the approval processes in her office. I couldn't call the finance department and force them to release her budget. However, I had these two hands to crush anyone who dared to threaten her safety with violence or intimidation. I had made my decision. I would no longer work for any other company. I laid out my plan to start my own professional security and executive protection firm. The goal was to bring together highly skilled veterans and provide protection services for individuals and corporations. Kate listened intently to every detail. She nodded in agreement, adding that the private security market had huge potential if it was run professionally and with strict discipline. She promised to help advise me on the legal procedures for obtaining a business license. That handshake on the village dike sealed a pact, a formal partnership between two people with a shared purpose. We turned and walked back toward the house. I began to calculate the capital I would need to make this company a reality within the next month. On Monday of the following week, I was at the local branch of the community bank. With the deed to our family home as collateral, I took out an additional loan for the maximum amount of $50,000. It still wasn't enough to cover the legally required startup capital. I took a bus back to the city to meet with 3 old teammates from my reconnaissance platoon, all of whom had been discharged and were now in business. I clearly presented my business plan for the security company and convinced them to invest as shareholders. Pooling all my resources, I managed to scrape together an initial capital of $80,000. The first task was to rent a space for our headquarters. To save money, I chose a 2-story row house deep in a small alley in a suburban district. The rent was $2,500 a month. The first floor would serve as the business office, the second as living quarters for the staff. After completing all the licensing and security clearance paperwork, I officially hung the company sign. Recruitment began immediately. I posted ads on veteran forums, giving preference to those who had served in combat units. The first 15 employees were carefully selected through in-person interviews. I personally designed a 1-month intensive training program that everyone had to complete before their first assignment. Every morning at 0500 hours, the entire staff had to assemble at a vacant lot at the end of the alley for a 5-mile run. This was followed by hand-to-hand combat drills, joint lock submission techniques, and emergency response protocols. All aspects of their life, from meals to sleep, were governed by military discipline. Anyone who was late was immediately docked pay. The first 3 months were incredibly difficult. Large corporations already had long-term contracts with established security firms. I printed out company portfolios myself and rode my motorcycle to every industrial park, warehouse, and small event to pitch our services. Our first contract was to guard an outdoor car lot for a meager $2,000 a month. I assigned 2 men to the gate and personally took the night shift, patrolling the lot to prevent any theft of parts. The second month, we secured a 3-day contract to provide perimeter security for an agricultural fair. Our monthly operating costs were nearly $13,000, including rent, salaries, food, and utilities. The income from these small contracts wasn't enough to cover our fixed expenses. The company's bank account was constantly in the red. The initial capital was rapidly depleting, and I had to use my own personal funds to cover the daily meals for my 15 men. For many days, our communal meals consisted of nothing more than boiled tofu and salty dried fish. Despite the hardship, not a single employee complained. They all trusted their commander's leadership. The financial pressure was immense. I had to secure a major contract in the next month, or the company would go bankrupt before it even had a chance to establish itself. At the end of the 4th month, the company successfully negotiated a contract to provide security for a large logistics warehouse chain in a suburban industrial park. The contract was worth $25,000 a month, enough to solve all our current financial problems. I had just returned to the office, the freshly signed and stamped contract in hand, when disaster struck. The next morning at 9 a.m., 3 official-looking government cars parked in a line in front of our headquarters. A joint inspection team, comprising representatives from the police, Department of Commerce, and the fire marshal's office, entered our building. They demanded to see all our legal documents, employment contracts, and the professional certifications of every employee. The team measured the office space, inspected every fire extinguisher, and combed through our accounting books. The audit lasted for 4 grueling hours. At the end, the lead inspector presented me with a 2-page violation report. They cited that the second-floor emergency exit was not up to code and that we were missing the latest standardized patrol logbook. The company was fined $5,000 and had its operations suspended for 7 days to rectify the violations. Before I could even process this, my phone rang. It was the director of the logistics chain who had just signed the contract yesterday. He was calling to inform me that he was unilaterally canceling our agreement. He told me frankly that he had just received a warning call from a high-ranking official, advising him not to do business with my company if he didn't want his warehouses to be subjected to constant administrative inspections. The Lifeline contract, barely 24 hours old, had turned into a worthless piece of paper. As evening fell, I sat alone in the dark office, staring at the pile of fines on my desk. Preston had made his move. He didn't use thugs. He used his father's network to activate government agencies to launch an overwhelming inspection. The sound of a car braking echoed from the alley. Kate walked in and flicked on the fluorescent lights. She pulled up a chair opposite me, opened her briefcase, and took out an economic zoning map of the city, spreading it across the table. She didn't offer any useless words of comfort or encouragement. Instead, she took a red pen and circled the areas with industrial parks and office buildings. She pointed out that Preston's strength lay in his ability to manipulate the mainstream market. In these 9-to-5 business environments, a single phone call from him was enough to make companies back down to avoid bureaucratic trouble. Kate pulled the map toward me, tapping the pen on areas marked with symbols for banks, treasuries, and ports. She advised me to immediately abandon competing for standard security guard contracts. The company needed to pivot to a niche market, protecting high-value shipments, escorting VIPs, and transporting cash. Kate asserted that for these high-risk targets, clients needed real soldiers who could protect assets with their lives, not administrative letters of guarantee from Preston's father. In that arena, the young heir's influence was useless, because he couldn't give orders to bullets or armed robbers. Kate's sharp strategic thinking instantly cleared my path forward. I rolled up the map, determined to draft proposals for jewelry centers and armored car companies first thing in the morning. 2 weeks after we pivoted our business strategy, I received an urgent call from a neighbor back home. My mother had collapsed by the well and had been rushed to the hospital. I handed over command of the company to my deputy, got on my motorcycle, and rode at top speed for over 60 miles to the Provincial General Hospital. I ran straight to the 3rd-floor intensive care unit and met the head of the department, who was standing outside the room holding my mother's chart. The doctor informed me that my mother's heart failure had progressed to an acute stage. She needed an emergency stent placement surgery immediately. However, the hospital was severely overloaded. The only operating room equipped for the procedure was fully booked, and my mother couldn't afford to wait. He advised the family to arrange an immediate transfer to a central, better-equipped hospital. Otherwise, we would have to face the worst-case scenario. For the next 3 hours, I frantically called every private medical transport service to charter an ambulance, but they were all either booked or lacked the necessary portable ventilator. Leaning against the white-painted hallway wall, I clutched my phone, looking at my mother through the glass door of the ICU, feeling utterly powerless. The sound of steady footsteps on the tiled floor broke the silence. Preston appeared at the end of the hallway. He was wearing a gray suit with a neatly tied cravat, flanked by 2 bodyguards in black. He approached with the casual air of someone taking a stroll. From his breast pocket, he produced a surgical priority certificate, stamped with the red seal of the hospital's board of directors. Preston smiled and explained that he had just used his father's connections to intervene, forcing the hospital to postpone another patient's surgery to free up the single VIP slot for him. He held the paper up to my eye level and made a clear offer. If I signed a written promise to stay away from Kate forever, he would immediately give this surgery slot to my mother. If I refused, he would walk away with the paper, and I could stand here and watch my mother fade away, my right hand clenched into a fist, my knuckles cracking. My duty as a son and my personal happiness were being weighed against each other in a cruel, manipulative game. I took a half step forward, ready to plant my fist in his face and snatch the paper, when the elevator doors suddenly burst open. Kate strode out, leading a team of 5 people in white coats bearing the rank insignia of military medical officers. 2 soldiers pushed a specialized gurney, equipped with a portable life support system, straight towards the ICU. Kate marched to the middle of the hallway and shoved Preston aside to clear the path. She didn't even glance at the priority paper in his hand. She directly ordered the military medical team to begin the procedures to transfer my mother to their gurney. Preston was stunned by the sudden appearance of the high-level medical team. He demanded to know by what authority Kate could deploy a military medical unit to a civilian hospital. Kate stopped, turned, and looked at him with an expression of utter contempt. She declared that she had used her personal credibility and her direct relationship with the Surgeon General of the Army to request an emergency medical evacuation, securing a dedicated military ambulance that was waiting downstairs. Kate pointed her finger at Preston's face, emphasizing every word. She asserted that a human life was not a cheap bargaining chip for him to use for political leverage or to coerce someone's affection. Leaving Preston frozen in place, Kate walked directly to the billing counter, took out her personal bank card, and paid for the entire transfer cost, including a $50,000 advance deposit for the surgery at the Central Military Medical Center. The wailing siren of the ambulance pierced the night as it transported my mother safely to the military hospital. The stent placement surgery began immediately. For 6 hours, I sat motionless on a cold stainless steel chair outside the operating room. Kate sat beside me, silent, occasionally getting up to bring me a cup of water. At 4 a.m., the light above the operating room door went out. The lead surgeon emerged, removed his mask, and gave a nod, announcing that the surgery was a success. The patient was out of critical danger and was being moved to the recovery room. Hearing the news, all the tension that had been coiled inside me for the past day and night suddenly vanished. My legs gave out. I dropped to one knee, my head falling onto Kate's shoulder. Tears, from a soldier who had never known fear in the face of bullets and bombs, now streamed down her blouse. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her tight, and declared that from this moment on, my life was officially bound to hers. 3 days later, my mother was conscious and able to eat thin porridge. After arranging for her care at the hospital, I returned to the company office to implement our new business plan. Proposals focusing on high-risk security were sent out en masse. 7 days later, we landed a contract to escort a shipment of diamonds worth $10 million from the airport to the central vault of a major jewelry corporation. The client demanded absolute secrecy and was willing to pay a service fee of $30,000 for a 3-hour operation. I personally selected our 6 best employees, all former Special Forces soldiers with experience in anti-smuggling operations. I mapped out the travel route, calculating every detail: vehicle speed, traffic lights, and blind spots with a high risk of ambush. The mission began at 2 p.m. 2 black armored SUVs sandwiched the transport truck. I sat in the front passenger seat of the lead vehicle, maintaining contact via encrypted radio every 30 seconds. As our convoy approached a traffic circle on the outskirts of the city, a large, unmarked box truck suddenly accelerated, attempting to cut into our formation. Watching in the rearview mirror, I immediately ordered the lead vehicle to hug the right shoulder and block the truck, creating a safe gap for the cargo vehicle to speed through. The 3-vehicle formation quickly reformed, maintaining a precise 10-meter distance in a tactical arrowhead formation. The convoy arrived safely at the central vault at 5 p.m. The corporation's representative personally inspected the seals, confirmed the cargo was intact, and immediately initiated a wire transfer for the full service fee. Our first high-risk contract was a resounding success, proving Kate's strategic redirection to be absolutely correct. A month later, my mother's health had fully recovered, and she was discharged to go home. Over the weekend, Kate suggested I buy some fruit and come to her parents' house for a family dinner. Her father's house, a two-story villa with a distinct military aesthetic, was located in a gated community for high-ranking officers. Kate's father, a retired colonel who had commanded in major conflicts, sat on the sofa in the living room. His expression was stern, his eyes appraising me from head to toe. I was about to take a sip of water when the doorbell rang. Preston walked in, carrying a large, rolled-up map. He greeted Kate's father with a fawning tone, asking for permission to present a strategic plan his staff at the Pentagon had just completed. Without waiting for an invitation, Preston spread the military map on the glass coffee table, and with a laser pointer, began his presentation. He pointed the laser at a mountainous border region, describing in detail a plan for a battalion-level ambush. He spoke at length about positioning interlocking fields of fire, logistical supply lines, and the use of heavy weaponry to create a closed envelopment. Kate's father listened, nodding occasionally, appearing to agree with the highly theoretical military jargon that Preston used so fluently. After finishing, Preston turned to me with a smirk. He mockingly advised that a common grunt, who only knew how to punch and kick like me, should learn more about grand strategic vision. Kate's father cleared his throat and turned to ask for my opinion on the plan. I set my glass down and walked over to the map. Glancing at the terrain symbols and contour lines, I pointed to 3 critical locations. I broke it down clearly. First mistake. The main ambush position was in a basin that acted as a wind tunnel for the prevailing southwesterly winds. If the enemy used smoke or chemical agents, the entire company would suffocate before firing a shot. Second mistake. The logistical supply route was drawn across a steep, clay-heavy slope. During the rainy season, that area would be prone to landslides, completely isolating the forward forces. The third and most critical mistake, the placement of 2 heavy machine gun positions on opposite high grounds, created a V-shaped crossfire. In a night operation with limited visibility, those 2 positions would fire directly into their own troops. I stood up straight and looked directly at Kate's father. I concluded, "This plan looks very impressive on paper, but if you tried to execute it in the field, it would get an entire battalion wiped out in under 2 hours." Kate's father was stunned. He put on his reading glasses and looked closely at the coordinates I had indicated. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead. The old colonel, realizing the fatal flaws born from the hubris of desk-bound staff officers, slammed his hand on the table. He pointed to the door and roared at Preston to get his fraudulent papers and get the hell out of his house. Preston's face went white. He scrambled to roll up his map and fled. Kate's father let out a long breath, went to his glass cabinet, and took out a bottle of aged, infused liquor. He poured 2 full glasses himself. He raised his glass to me, officially calling me son-in-law for the first time, acknowledging the practical combat skills and character of a frontline soldier. In the 6 months following the Diamond Escort contract, my security company received a continuous stream of requests from major financial institutions. Our reputation for having a disciplined team of bodyguards who acted swiftly and were willing to bleed to protect their objectives spread throughout the specialized business world. Each week, we averaged 15 cash-in transit escorts from the state treasury to commercial bank branches across the city. Every trip followed a strict protection protocol with 3 armored vehicles in a convoy, equipped with signal jammers and dash cams that streamed live data back to our operations center. For executive protection details, I personally selected guards with advanced martial arts certifications, arranging a 3-layer security bubble around our clients during their public appearances. Company revenue skyrocketed to $400,000 a month. With the third quarter financial report in hand, I immediately instructed our accountant to pay off the entire principal and interest on the $80,000 bank and personal loans. The deed to our family home was safely recovered. My old comrades who had invested initially all received dividend checks that far exceeded their expectations. The salary for our 30 full-time employees was raised to a competitive $5,000 a month per person. I decided to allocate an additional $50,000 from our profits to lease a 5,000-square-foot vacant lot by the river. We had it leveled, paved with concrete, and covered with a roof to create a dedicated, specialized martial arts and combat training facility for the entire company. On the last Sunday afternoon in November, I called Kate and asked her to meet me at the newly completed training facility. The training ground had no flowers or decorative banners, only heavy punching bags hanging from the rafters and a floor covered in black rubber mats. Kate drove up at exactly 3 p.m. She was wearing a simple, comfortable tracksuit, her hair tied back in a ponytail. She got out of her car with a curious expression. As she approached the center of the training mat, I stood at attention and pulled a red velvet box from my jacket pocket. Opening the lid, I revealed an exquisitely designed diamond ring. I had purchased it with my entire first month's salary as CEO, a tangible result of the sweat and tears I had poured into the business world. I didn't kneel. I didn't use flowery words. I looked directly into Kate's eyes, took her left hand, and spoke each word clearly. I told her that this entire enterprise was built on the direction she gave me when I was at my lowest point. I asked for her permission to place this ring on her finger, to officially establish her role as my partner, my companion on the road ahead. Kate looked at the sparkling diamond ring, tears streaming down her cheeks. She nodded decisively, spreading her fingers so I could slide the ring onto her ring finger. There, in the middle of a training ground that smelled of sweat and rubber, we sealed our tumultuous journey with a practical, unadorned, but absolutely solid proposal. In early December, a special task force from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office officially launched an investigation into several anonymous complaints. The investigation targeted a series of abuses committed by Preston over the past 2 years. Evidence was gathered quickly and was irrefutable. The Provincial General Hospital submitted all security camera footage showing Preston and his bodyguards using official-looking documents and faking an emergency order to usurp a VIP surgery slot. The Department of Transportation provided GPS records of the 3 government vehicles Preston had improperly dispatched for his bogus administrative inspection of my company. Evidence of his threats, coercive messages, and the forced transfers of male officers who had worked with Kate was also fully recovered. Faced with a mountain of evidence during the hearing, Preston had no way to deny the charges. An expanded disciplinary board was urgently convened. Preston's father, the powerful 4-star general, was required to attend. When the audio recording of the phone call where Preston used his father's name to threaten the logistics director was played, the general slumped in his chair, his face ashen. Realizing his own political career was in grave danger, he stood and addressed the board. He announced he was cutting off all support for his son and requested that he be punished to the full extent of military law. At the end of the hearing, the most severe disciplinary action was handed down. Preston was stripped of his rank, dishonorably discharged from the service, and permanently lost his position as a staff officer. The once arrogant heir of power packed his belongings and left the Pentagon through a back door in utter disgrace. His days of borrowing power to bully others finished for good. With the final obstacle removed, Kate and I were married in mid-December. We didn't choose a lavish banquet hall. Instead, we booked the ballroom at the Fort Myer Officers Club. The guest chairs were filled with soldiers in crisp dress uniforms. On the groom's side, my mother, healthy and vibrant in a deep red traditional dress, walked from table to table, sharing a toast with our guests. Uncle Frank and the rest of the relatives from back home were on their best behavior, no one daring to speak loudly or act boorishly as they had before. Kate's father, in his full dress uniform adorned with medals, stood at the entrance, shaking hands with old comrades who had come to celebrate with us. At 11:30 a.m., the ceremony began. My old division commander, Colonel Evans, stepped up to the podium to act as the master of ceremonies. He adjusted the microphone and announced the reason for our gathering. He briefly recounted the story of my discharge papers 8 months prior, and the risky mission he had given me to go on a blind date. He pointed towards me, standing in a black tuxedo next to Kate in her pristine white wedding gown, and declared how incredibly proud he was that his best ranger had successfully completed his most important mission, protecting the target. The entire hall rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation. Colonel Evans stepped down from the podium and embraced Kate's father, his old brother-in-arms. The 2 old soldiers, their eyes glistening, clinked their glasses together, celebrating the perfect ending for their children. I held Kate's hand tightly as we walked to raise our glasses of red wine, bowing our heads in gratitude to the comrades and family who had witnessed the storms we had weathered. 5 years passed in a blur. The security company that started with 15 employees had grown into a large-scale security corporation with over 300 full-time staff. The company headquarters moved to a 5-story building on a main commercial street. I bought a spacious high-rise condo in a prime district and a 7-seat SUV for the family. My mother, now 70, was in stable health thanks to regular medical care. She spent her days walking in the park below our building and helping us look after our son, who had just turned 3. Kate had transferred to a position at the National Defense University, working as a tactics instructor, which gave her more time for our family. On a Wednesday morning, Kate received a call from her old unit's administrative office. They informed her that Colonel Evans had officially received his retirement orders and would be leaving the base at the end of the week. After dinner that evening, I discussed it with Kate. We rearranged our schedules. I delegated full operational control of the company to my board of directors, and we prepared to go visit my old commander. The next morning, I drove our 7-seater out of the city, cruising down the now smoothly paved highway. The car glided along in the early morning sun. I glanced in the rearview mirror, remembering the image of myself clutching a rucksack, crammed onto a dilapidated, fume-filled bus on the very day I received my discharge papers. The 200-mile journey was now just a comfortable 4-hour drive. At 12 p.m. sharp, we arrived at the familiar main gate of the military base. After presenting our IDs and stating our reason for the visit, the guard at the gate snapped a salute and raised the barrier. The scenery inside the base hadn't changed much. The yellow-painted 3-story buildings, the vast concrete parade ground, and the rows of ancient oak trees stood just as they always had. I parked in front of the command headquarters. As we got out of the car, I saw Colonel Evans, dressed in simple civilian clothes, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, waiting for us on the steps. The passage of time was etched in his now completely white hair. Kate and I walked briskly toward him, stopped, clicked our heels, and rendered a sharp salute out of instinct, even though we were not in uniform. The colonel descended the steps and clapped me on the shoulder twice, hard. He nodded repeatedly, his eyes filled with satisfaction as he looked at the confident, successful man his former ranger had become. Kate stepped forward and presented him with a box of premium tea and a fine porcelain tea set. He accepted the gift with a hearty laugh and gestured for us to follow him to the base's guest house for a farewell lunch with the new command staff. The farewell lunch was a simple affair in the guest house's second dining room. There were no gourmet dishes on the white-clothed table, just sliced boiled pork, a soup made with wild bamboo shoots and bone broth, and a platter of crispy fried stream fish. In the center of the table was a large jug of potent corn whiskey, a local specialty. One by one, the 5 officers of the new command staff stood to raise a glass, wishing the colonel a healthy and peaceful retirement. Colonel Evans poured himself a full glass of the corn whiskey, turned, and clinked his glass against mine. After the toast, he began to tell the young officers the story of the top-secret mission he had assigned in Office Number 1 all those years ago. He recounted pulling the tan folder from the steel cabinet and my stubborn refusal to accept the donated money. He emphasized that using a soldier with no connections and no money to confront a powerful, arrogant staff officer was an extremely risky gamble. The colonel looked directly at Kate, admitting that at the time, he was betting everything on the grit and integrity of a frontline soldier, hoping to create a shield strong enough to protect her. At the end of his story, he drained his glass and declared loudly that connecting the two of us was the most successful tactical decision of his entire command career. Everyone at the table raised their glasses in unison, their laughter echoing through the room. At 10 p.m., the party ended. Colonel Evans and his staff returned to their quarters. Kate and I asked for permission to take one last walk around the base before driving to our hotel in town. We walked side by side on the concrete path, passing the nighttime obstacle course. The sky was cloudless, the brilliant stars sharp and clear in the profound silence of the military installation. The night wind rustled through the oak trees. Kate stopped and leaned her head against my right shoulder, her steady breath warming my jacket. She mentioned that tomorrow, we had to register our son for his new preschool. I wrapped my left arm around her shoulders and my right hand clasped hers, the diamond on her finger glinting in the starlight. Standing in the place where I had poured my blood and sweat for 8 years of my youth, I looked up at the night sky and spoke, each word deliberate and firm. I repeated my conviction that I had never for a moment regretted signing those discharge papers. Squeezing Kate's hand a little tighter, I summed up our long journey with one final, unshakable promise. For the first half of my life, I wore the uniform to protect our country. For the second half, I'll be your bodyguard, protecting you for the rest of our lives, never leaving your side. Kate nodded, her grip tightening on mine. We turned and walked together, steady and sure, on the road leading toward the main gate, closing the chapter on a stormy past to open a new future.